There is a window that opens every single night in your child's life. Most parents don't know it exists, and so most parents let it close without ever using it. It happens in the last few minutes before your child falls asleep. And what happens in those minutes, what they hear, what they feel, what their brain does with the information it receives, is different from any other moment in the day, because the brain that is falling asleep is not the same as the brain that is wide awake. And once you understand what's actually happening inside your child's mind during those final moments before sleep, you'll never rush through bedtime the same way again. This video is about one phrase, just one. Something you can say tonight in under 30 seconds that begins to change how your child sees themselves. Not just tomorrow, but for the rest of their life. It sounds simple, and it is. But the science behind why it works is something most parents have never been told. So let's start there. When a child is falling asleep, their brain moves through a transition that researchers in neuroscience and psychology have studied for decades. As the body relaxes and the eyes grow heavy, the brain gradually shifts from its active waking state into something called the hypnagogic state, the threshold between wakefulness and sleep. In this state, the critical analytical part of the brain, the part that filters, questions, and resists, becomes quiet. And what remains is something closer to pure absorption. The brain in this state doesn't evaluate information the way it does during the day. It doesn't argue with it. It doesn't push back. It takes what it receives and begins to process it at a much deeper level, weaving it into the emotional memory, into the child's growing sense of who they are and whether the world is safe. Think of it this way. During the day, information knocks on the door and your child decides whether to let it in. At the threshold of sleep, the door is already open. This is why what happens at bedtime matters so much more than most people realize. It's also why the phrase you're about to hear works the way it does. Not because of magic, because of timing. Before we get to the phrase, it's worth understanding what most children are processing as they fall asleep. Children carry more into bedtime than we tend to notice. The moment at lunch when they said something wrong and the other kids laughed. The test they're worried about. The argument from the morning that was never fully resolved. The feeling, vague but persistent, that they didn't do enough today, weren't good enough today, weren't quite right in some way they can't name. Children don't always talk about these things, but they carry them, and they take them into sleep. What the brain does with emotional material during sleep is consolidate it. Sleep is when the brain processes the day, sorting experiences into memory, strengthening neural connections, deciding what matters and what doesn't. If a child falls asleep carrying shame, the brain consolidates that shame. If they fall asleep carrying anxiety, the brain consolidates that anxiety. The feeling doesn't disappear in the morning. It becomes more embedded. This is not a reason to panic. It is a reason to pay attention to what you give your child to take into sleep. Because the reverse is also true. If a child falls asleep carrying a feeling of being seen, being loved, being fundamentally okay, the brain consolidates that too. And over time, across hundreds of nights, that consolidation becomes something far more powerful than a feeling. It becomes a belief. A deep, cellular automatic belief about who they are and what they deserve. This is what the phrase does. Night after night, it gives the brain something specific to consolidate. Something that, over time, rewires the story your child tells about themselves. So here it is. The phrase is this. Tell me about something that was hard for you today, and tell me how you got through it. That's it. 2 questions. 1 sentence. Now, the first time you hear that, it might sound like any other bedtime check-in. But look more carefully at what it's actually doing. Most parents, at bedtime, ask variations of the same question. How was your day? What was the best part? Did anything fun happen? These are warm questions. There's nothing wrong with them, but they direct the child's attention toward the positive and away from the difficult. And what they unintentionally communicate is this. The hard parts of your day are not something we talk about here. The child learns to perform happiness at bedtime, to report the highlights, to skim over the rest. The phrase we're talking about does something completely different. It goes directly to the hard thing. It names it without fear. It says, The difficult parts of your life are not something to hide from me. They are something we look at together, and this is the part that changes everything, it asks the second question: how did you get through it? Not did it work out? Not was everything okay in the end? How did you get through it? Because your child did get through it. They are here, in their bed, at the end of the day. Whatever happened, they survived it. And most children have never been asked to look at that fact directly. Here's what happens in the brain when a child answers that second question. The brain does something called narrative integration. It takes a difficult experience, something that felt overwhelming or confusing, and it builds a story around it. A story with a beginning, a middle, and an end. A story in which the child is not a victim of what happened, but the person who moved through it. Psychologists have found that the ability to build this kind of coherent narrative around difficult experiences is one of the strongest predictors of emotional resilience we know of. Children who can tell a story about hard things, not just what happened but how they responded, develop what researchers call an internal locus of control, the belief that they have agency, that what happens to them is not entirely out of their hands. Children who never practice this, who either avoid the hard parts or are never guided through them, are more likely to experience difficult events as things that simply happen to them, with no story they can build around them, no sense of themselves as someone who can navigate what life brings. The phrase builds that narrative muscle, one night at a time, and it does it during the window when the brain is most open to receiving it, right at the edge of sleep, when the door is open and the brain is listening. Let's talk about what this looks like in practice, because there are a few things worth understanding before you try it tonight. The first is that your child might not have an answer right away. That's okay. The silence is part of it. You're asking them to do something they may not have been asked to do before, to look at a hard moment without flinching, and to locate themselves inside it as someone who coped. That takes a moment. Don't rush in to fill the silence. Don't simplify the question or suggest an answer. Just wait. The brain is working. The second thing is that the hard thing they name might surprise you. Children often carry things we don't expect. Something small to you can be enormous to them. A comment from a teacher, a moment on the playground, a feeling they couldn't name until right now, in the quiet dark when someone finally asked. Receive whatever they bring without minimizing it. Not, oh, that's not a big deal, or at least it wasn't worse. Just tell me more about that. And then, so how did you handle it? The third thing is consistency. The power of this phrase is not in one night, it's in the pattern. When a child knows that every night someone is going to ask them about the hard thing and believe in their ability to have gotten through it, they start to internalize that belief themselves. They start to look for the answer during the day, not just at night. They start to notice, I went through something hard, I got through it, I do this. That noticing, over time, becomes identity. There is something else this phrase does that is worth naming separately. It changes the relationship. Most children, by middle childhood, have learned to present a curated version of themselves to their parents. They share the good stuff. They hide the struggle. Not because they don't trust their parents, but because the daily rhythm of family life rarely makes room for the difficult, unfinished, messy parts of a child's inner world. When you ask, tell me about something that was hard for you today, you are making room. You are signaling, I am not only interested in your victories, I am interested in you. The full version, including the parts that didn't go well. Children who receive that signal consistently develop something that researchers in attachment theory call felt security. Not just the knowledge that their parent loves them, but the felt experience of being known, of having someone in their life who sees the whole of them and stays. Felt security is different from unconditional love, though they often go together. You can love a child completely and still not know them. Felt security requires being known, and being known requires someone asking the right question, consistently, quietly, at the end of the day, in the dark. Let's look at what this builds over time. In the short term, within weeks, most parents report that their children begin to open up more at bedtime. The conversation stops being a routine and starts being a real one. The child starts bringing things they've been holding all day, sometimes all week, In the medium term, across months, something shifts in how the child handles difficulty during the day. They become slightly more likely to try things that are hard, slightly less likely to avoid situations that feel uncomfortable. This isn't because they've become fearless, it's because they have a framework now, a story they already know how to tell. Something was hard, and I got through it. In the long term, across years, the effect is deeper than behavior. It lives in the child's self-concept, in the automatic unconscious story they carry about who they are. Are they someone who is overwhelmed by difficulty? Or are they someone who has a history, a real lived remembered history, of meeting hard things and coming through them? That history doesn't come from nowhere. It gets built, one night at a time, by a parent who asked a question that most parents never think to ask. One last thing. Some parents, when they hear this, feel a quiet weight of regret. They think about all the bedtimes that passed without this question, all the windows that opened and closed. Let that go. The brain is not a fixed object. It is a living system continuously shaped by experience. Your child's brain is shaping itself right now, tonight, and every night that comes after. The window is open tonight. You don't need to explain why you're asking something new. You don't need to announce a change. You just need to sit on the edge of the bed, in the quiet before sleep, and ask, "Tell me about something that was hard for you today, and tell me how you got through it." Then listen. What you'll hear, over time, is not just the story of their day. You'll hear a child learning to believe in themselves. One night, one answer, one small story at a time. That is what the phrase does. And tonight is when it starts.